So I've released the first public alpha of Tightener, and what I'll do in this video is a very quick run through of an installation and a configuration of Tightener, and we'll be running some extend scripts from Linux and Mac and Windows on other nodes. So the end result of this demo will be that I can launch an extend script and launch that from, say, Linux and make the script run on a Mac or on the Windows machine. So it just the whole process will show you how to install Tightener and how to get it all running. Now, everything that I'll be showing in this video is also documented in the Tightener Github Repository. So there's a GitHub, my handle is Zwetterman, and there's Tightener docs. And if you go there, there's a wiki with all the documentation, and here the cookbook is roughly what I'll be showing in this video. You can also download the latest Tightener, so you just go to the code, then to the releases, and then currently there's only an alpha release, and that gives you a link to my Rorohiko cloud account, where you can then click download, and that downloads the zip file. So I have installed that same zip file on a Windows machine and on a Linux machine. These machines are all on the same network here on my local network, so they can interact once we make the necessary configurations. So what I'll do now is I'll go through the steps of installing and configuring Tightener. So I can just close these things. So I have this zip file, I have it on my desktop. So the first thing you do is you unzip it, and that is straightforward. Now for the Mac, there is an installer, but the installer on the Mac is a little bit cumbersome because we need to actually tell the Mac OS that it's fine to install this unsigned install.command. So what you need to do is right click install.command, say open, and then click the open button, and that actually installs the Tightener on your computer. So now it should be we should be able to use Tightener. So if I say cd Tightener, that takes me to the Tightener directory. So that's the one here on my desktop. You can actually move Tightener anywhere you want, but you have to move it before you run the installer. So because the installer actually customizes your profile so that it actually knows where to find Tightener. So that is the initial part of the installation on Mac. Same thing on Windows. So extract. So Tightener is very command line heavy, so pretty much everything is done via the command line, and Tightener adds a whole lot of commands to the available things you can do in a command line session. So on Windows you just double click install.bat, and that sets up Tightener. So Tightener is now installed on Windows, and you need to open a new window after running it on Windows. That's pretty clear, but on Mac it might not be clear. You actually have to close the window that you might have open. Any windows that are open don't have the Tightener yet, so you need to open new windows after installing it. So on Windows I can do cd Tightener. Note the underscore, so this is a single command, so it's not cd space, it's cd underscore. That takes me to the same Tightener directory, but in this case on Windows. And on Linux again the same thing. We open this and extract all of it to the desktop or wherever we want it. Close. Okay, that's done. So, and on Linux I need to run it from the command line, but the script that I use is the same script as the one that I used on Mac. Install.command. Done. So make sure to close this window and open a new terminal window, and then cd tightener should work and take me to the main tightener directory. The second step that you normally need to do is configure your text editor. Now in my case I use Sublime and it's already set up, so I don't need to go through those motions, but that's all documented in the wiki. So tell tightener where your text editor is, and then you need to initialize a default configuration file. So the copy config will take a default file from what you downloaded and move it into your personal preferences directory, which is different on Mac and Windows and Linux, but that's all documented. So I'm creating the config.ini, and the next thing I need to do is actually adjust it. Edit config, so which calls on to my installed text editor. Now in case of Linux there's not so much that I can configure, so on Mac and Windows I'll be configuring a version of InDesign, but on Linux there is no InDesign, so instead I'll be telling Linux to use one of the other platforms. So the Mac that I'm using in this demo is called Holly, and the domain name for Holly is hollyrorohiko.com. So what I'm telling here is the tightener on Linux is that the InDesign coordinator can be found on Holly and is known on Holly as InDesign main. So main is the engine that we'll use on Holly. So if I now refer to InDesign on this Linux machine, it will actually know to reach out to Holly to run InDesign scripts. The second thing I need to do is to make sure that the tightener on this computer is network enabled. So by default, tightener has a swarm of nodes, but those nodes are limited to interactions within the local computer. So to allow it to actually reach out to other computers, I need to run a different main coordinator. So this main coordinator, there's a number of them, but this is a Zojo command line program which embeds tightener and can interact with remote nodes that also run the same coordinator. So those two changes are needed on Linux. The main app needs to be changed and the reference to InDesign. So, and that actually configures Linux. So to make sure there is no background nodes running, you can run kill apps. Kill apps will run kill all background tightener nodes, which will force all tightener nodes to reread the config because the config has been changed. And the next thing I do is also start my main node, which is the network enabled main node. So, and I just run that from a command line. So now I actually have made this Linux a tightener network enabled computer. So same thing on Windows. So on Windows I can do copy config. So that sets up my default configuration. I do edit config. And I need to make similar changes. Now on Windows I do have InDesign, and I have both an InDesign server and I have an InDesign desktop. So I'll be using the InDesign server on this Windows machine just for the sake of argument. So it's a 2022 SDK version 17. It is a server, so I change this to InDesign server suffix, and then it will just use the configuration named configuration and no port. So we don't need any networking capabilities in the InDesign server itself. Unlike what you normally do with sample client and so on, you would open a port. So in this case I don't need to open any ports on the InDesign server. That's all I want to do. So I can just save this config. And then what I need to do is now InDesign server needs a plugin to be able to interact with tightener. So, and the alpha release contains scripts to do that. So all I need to do is id plugin install. id plugin install will consult the config. to know where it needs to install that plugin, and it has a number of plugins available. It has like a 16.2, 16.3 or 16.1, 16.2 or 16.3 or 17.0. So different versions of InDesign or InDesign Server can be used or targeted. Plugin install. Okay, so now it's installed the correct plugin into the InDesign Server version. And then the next thing I can do is ID launch, which is also better than running it any other way, because ID launch will read the config file and make sure that we launch the correct version of InDesign, especially if you have a computer with multiple versions of InDesign. It's easy to get confused and launch the wrong one. But in this case, if you use ID launch, you use the correct version. So it loads InDesign Server, because that's what we configured. And InDesign Server is now running. Okay. On the Mac, I also do copy config and edit config. And I'll be doing the same changes. So I need to get the Zojo command line tightener release here. That's one thing. And again, in this case, I won't change anything. It's using an InDesign 2022 version 17 desktop. So we'll be using the desktop version of InDesign. So the gateway is configured. Now I forgot to check whether I actually configured the gateway on Windows, so I'll recheck that. Edit config. So you see it's very command line heavy. So where is it? No, I forgot. So I need to reconfigure Zojo CMD line. So it needs to use the network enabled gateway. See, and because I've changed the config, now I need to relaunch anything that might be running. So in this case, I'll stop the InDesign Server and I'll start it again. But I'll also run kill apps. So this will kill any background apps that might be running with the older config. So ID launch. So now we're running with that configuration that's network enabled. And the other thing I need to do is start the gateway. So just like on Linux, now this is a tightener enabled networking computer. So it will be listening for requests from other computers. It's running InDesign Server, and InDesign Server has tightener embedded. So on the Mac we do the same. Install the plugin. Plugin install. Okay, and then ID launch to make sure we run. So again, it reads the config, figures out which InDesign we'll be using, launches it. So this avoids any confusion because I have multiple versions of InDesign installed on this computer. And there it is. And then the other thing I need to do is GW console, which is the gateway. So it's essentially the main node is being launched and it's network enabled. Okay, so now everything is set up. So we have two versions of InDesign running. On Mac it's a regular version of InDesign. On Windows it's a server version of InDesign. And on Linux there is no InDesign. They all three platforms are running the GW console, which is a main node that is network enabled. And now we can start trying stuff out. So what I'll do now is I'll just open a new window and I do cd underscore samples. That takes me to the sample scripts. And here I can use RRE, run remote extend script. And first I'll ask it to run it with InDesign. So InDesign actually refers to this computer itself. So I'm going to run on this computer itself in InDesign, and I'm going to run a script called id make pdf.jsx. So, and that's a little PDF making script, so it's very silly and it doesn't do much, but it's enough to show something. So now Macs have AppNap, so occasionally these things fall asleep a little bit. So by clicking InDesign, I made it wake up. So Tightener does have facilities to actually stop AppNap, but I haven't quite figured it out to do it, how to do it correctly, so it's not really working all the time. I think once I've woken it up, it remains awake, but the very first time it's still falling asleep. So now notice T1 PDF is here on the desktop. I'll just open another desktop window and I'll rerun that script. See, and now it's making a PDF on the desktop each time I run that script. If I go to Windows and I can open a command line, another command line, command prompt, and I do cd samples, takes me to the same directory. And here I'll do the same, so run remote extend script. Again, I'll say InDesign, but here on Windows this means something different. This InDesign refers to the InDesign server on this computer. And I'll use the same script, id make pdf.jsx. So, and that did something. You see T1 PDF appeared on my desktop. Each time I run it, another PDF file appears, and you can see in the background that the server is doing stuff. So, and note that this server is running configuration no port, so it doesn't have any network capability. It's just purely running via Tightener. So that's all cool. I can now do this. So what I can do now is I'll make this a smaller window so I can actually show that on my computer at the same time as the other one. So fit to window. Okay, we can see the Windows machine, and I'll go to the Linux machine as well. Here's the Linux machine, and I'll run the Linux machine in a window as well. Exit full screen, and then right. So we can see Windows is running, the Mac is running, and Linux is running. So I'll open up a new command line on Linux, new window, there it is, and I'll do the same thing, cd samples. So I'm again in the sample scripts, and what I do now is run remote extend scripts, and again I say InDesign, but on Linux we've configured InDesign to mean the InDesign on Holly, which is the Mac. So this InDesign here on the Mac is targeted, and I use the same make pdf.jsx. So I'll show the desktop on Holly because that's where the action will be. Okay, so keep an eye on the desktop, and now I run on Linux rre InDesign make pdf, and I might, yeah, there it is, see T5 appeared. So, and each time I run this, T6 appears, T7 appears, and so on. So essentially the same command resolves the word InDesign differently depending on the platform I'm on. So on Linux, InDesign resolves to the InDesign on the Mac. I can also change the config here. No, I'm not going to do that, so because then I need to restart, and so, well, yeah, I can do it. Edit config, and then I'll change this to use not Holly but Freddy dev win 2022. So this is the domain name of the Windows machine that you see here in the background. So now I've changed the configuration on the Linux machine so that the word InDesign now refers to the Windows machine, which is running InDesign server rather than. So in order to make sure the config is taken into account, I need to do kill apps, and you see the GW console has terminated because it needed to reread the config, so I need to relaunch it. Okay, that's running again now. And now I can run the same command. And I'll move stuff around a little bit so you can see. So here's the Windows and the Linux. So on Linux I run a script. And then this appears, you see now the Windows machine is having new PDF files appear. Because now I've actually retargeted this word InDesign to run on Windows. So that's a very, very quick, brief demo of how Tightener is essentially about coordinating a swarm of active nodes. So right now we can only have basic nodes or InDesign. In the future there will be Illustrator and other ones, but that is all to come.